Shavuot. So what I hope to do tonight is share my story, my personal story, and how I got a relationship with Rabbi Weinberg at 14 years old, and how that became, now we're on our 18th year, I guess, and following through with what we've learned through him personally. But it started a very interesting conversation. I was 14 having a hard time in yeshiva. So my father, who was a student of Rav Noach, about Tshuva from Aish, 30, 40 years ago, he brought me to meet Rav Noach in New York. So Rav Noach sits me down and says, do you know God loves you? I was like, Rabbi, leave me alone. That's the last thing I need to hear right now. He says, do I need to prove it to you? I said, no, of course. I grew up that way. Hashem loves me. I know, whatever. His eyes start burning. Clenches his fist. He slams at him. He says, dance, dummy! I was like, I didn't know what to do with that reaction. And we talked for another hour and a half. And he says, listen, I want you to come to Israel for 2 weeks. Spend time with me. And if you like it, we'll talk more. So I come to Israel. I just turned 15. And didn't know a word of Hebrew. I had a very special experience with him. Talked with him a lot. Got to learn with him. At the end of the 2 weeks, I was deciding whether or not I'm going to stay or go. I was in Meishar, and I bought a lottery ticket. 54 million shekel lottery ticket. And again, I didn't speak any Hebrew. So the guy hands me the slip, and I thought it was an instant results, and I start comparing the numbers. 7, 4, 15. In Israel by myself. This is amazing. I can't believe this. I'm going to win this lottery. I got to the end, and my heart's pounding. Middle of Meir Sharm, I start jumping. I won! I can't believe it. I won this lottery. This is crazy. I can't believe it. This is unbelievable. And the guy looks at me and says to me, it's a receipt. I was so embarrassed. I ran back to my room. I ran back to the city, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. And people were watching. This is like, because they really thought I won, and I really did win. And I was sitting there in my dorm, and with my hands in my face, and I'm like, oh my God, what was I thinking? And then I thought to myself, if I won the 54 million shekel lottery, why am I so happy? I could do anything. And then I thought about all the people I know who have that kind of money. I said, they're not jumping up and down. Why? Because you can't do everything because of money. Then I thought of my first conversation with Noach, and I understood for the first time. If God really loves you, and He's saying, you can do it, and I'm rooting for you, presumably that would be worth more in terms of your capabilities than 54 million shekels. So for the first time I understood dance dummy, and I said, I'm staying. I called my parents. I said, Abba, I want to stay. Dropped out of high school and came to learn Nation Torah. That was the story. So every day for 7 years, I walked into his car. And towards the beginning, I said, Rebbe, and I'm starting with my first one. First of all, God loves you. Lesson number 1, okay? But lesson number 2. I asked him, Rebbe, could you be my Rebbe? So he says, do you know what the definition of a Rebbe is? So I said, no, please tell me what the definition of it. Every day I used to prepare a question for him. And that question became the topic of conversation, and he would give me an answer. I would come to the Destinaishions every day, and I was stuck. Guys, give me a question. I'm stuck. I need to go to the Rebbe. So one day I asked him, Rebbe, could you be my Rebbe? He says, what's the definition of a Rebbe? Definition of a Rebbe is someone you don't ignore. Either you listen to him or you change his mind. So he said, are you willing to be my Talmud? I said, I could try. So that was how we started our relationship. And I started getting involved in what goes on here. Groups come from all over the world. And a very interesting group with an Israeli professor, as I was starting to develop my programs here, and learning and starting to develop, an Israeli professor came with a group of Muslim, Christian, and Jewish students to learn about the politics and religion of Jerusalem. And you know, there's a lot of politics, a lot of religion. So they wanted to hear, they went to the Muslims and the Christians, and when they wanted to hear the Jewish perspective, they ended up in Nation Torah. And somehow they ended up with me. Okay, we're talking about 30 very smart postgraduate students. I was a young guy with an Israeli professor. And they started asking me peace with the Palestinians and all these questions. And I'm like, first thing I told them was, I can't tell you the Jewish definition, the Jewish answer, because there's so many of them. But I can give you what I think makes sense. And at the end of it, If it makes sense, then take it with you. At the end of the conversation, a Muslim girl raises her hand. A Muslim woman raises her hand, and she asked me, says, you seem very proud of being Jewish. Could you share something from your Judaism that makes you proud? I said, yeah. You might have heard this idea. I'm going to give you a reason why I'm saying this. I said, let me ask you a question. What do you think is the most famous and influential line in the whole Bible? This is my question for them. What would you guys say? Most famous line. What do you say?
Be Jew as yourself.
Oh, very good. That's what I was hoping for. After a few minutes, that's what they came to. Love your neighbor as yourself, right? The Jews made it up. The Christians made it famous, right? I asked them, could I command you to love someone else? What's your name? So, what's your name? Max? Could I command you to love someone? No. Doesn't make any sense, right? So they all said, no, you can't command me to love someone, right? So I said, it turns out the most famous line in the whole Bible doesn't make any sense. So the Jews were like, oh, that's what we thought. But the Christians and the Muslims were very upset. Now, obviously, I'm talking to the Jews in the room, right? I wasn't interested in the Christians and Muslims, but I'll get to that in a second also. So the most famous line doesn't make any sense. And I asked him, I said, I want to ask you another question. If you think about it, what's the most talked about, written about, movies about topic in all of human history? Probably love. Right? Could you define love for me? That was my question for them. And the place erupted. It was fascinating. It looked like a base medrash. They're like, how can we, go this and back? How's it pop? So I said to them, they came out after 10 minutes, and they're like, doesn't make any sense. The most talked about, first of all, the most famous line in the whole Bible doesn't make any sense. And the most talked about topic in all of human history doesn't seem to have a clear definition. That's crazy. So they came back and they said, okay, what do you say? So I said, I'm going to give you what I believe is the Jewish definition of love. Again, I heard from my Rebbe. And if it makes sense, I'm going to answer the first question as well. You ready? You guys ever heard this before? What's the Jewish definition of love?
Yeah.
Giving is a tactic. What's the Jewish definition? Love is the emotional pleasure you feel. Right? It's not a physical pleasure, it's not a spiritual. It's an emotional pleasure you feel when you see and identify the good in another and connect them with that good. Again, love is an emotional pleasure you feel when you see the good in another and connect the good with them. I'll explain to you. If you have a neighbor you hate, you can't say I hate you because you're kind, gentle, warm human being, right? Why do you hate him? Because there's trash and music or anything bad that we can identify. Right? Love, we all have milas and chesronos. We all have positives and negatives. When I focus on the negative, I'm going to hate the guy. When I focus on the positive, I'm going to love the guy. So I said to them, so how does that answer the first question? Is it possible for me to command you to love someone? According to this definition. Is it possible for me to command you to love someone? What do you say? Yes? How? What's the commandment?
See the good.
Focus on the good. If you focus on the good, you'll feel the emotional pleasure. So again, love is an emotional pleasure that you feel when you see the good, and tzivoy is focus on the good, and you'll end up identifying, feeling the love. So I said to him, this changed my life, because before I got married, I walked into my Rebbe's office. I said, Rebbe, I'm 20 years old, and there's a 50% chance it's not going to work. Give me some eitzah. He sits me down, he calms me down, he says, okay? And he teaches me this definition. And he said to me, and this is what I told this group. He said to me, make a list of everything good you could find by your column. Then come back to me. I had to go home thinking about everything good I could find. It's like what are all the milas, all the good stuff I could see. Came back the next day. I wanted to show. He said, no, it's for you. He said, now, but every week before Shabbos, for the first year of your marriage, go over that list and then add a new thing that you learned that week about her that you didn't know. So every week I had to think, and I was a Talmud, right? You don't need to write Rebbe. So every week I had to go back and think, what's a new thing that I could find by her that's a Michael? I told him it changed my life. Why did it change my life? Because I thought Hollywood, you fall in love, right? What's the matter with falling in love? You fall out of love. But Yiddishkeit says not only can you work on it, you actually have to work on it. And it's something you could change your whole life. You could upgrade your whole life. You have a roommate you don't like, there's a way to work on it. There's a tzivot to work on it. So I said to them, do you see that this one idea could change all of civilization? One Jewish idea could change all of civilization. So lesson number 3 is the power of Teres Chaim. In other words, you see here a definition of love that all of my Rebbe's Torah was built on stuff what's called self-evident. What's self-evident? When I told you over the definition of love, you know what you said? Yeah, sounds right. That's how when you give over Torah to someone who doesn't feel connected to it, the first levels of Torah has to be like that. Where you can't be like, oh, Rashi said, Shkoyach. Who's the next Rashi? Right? But if you define, if you give the self-evident wisdom of Yiddishkeit, what's called Torah's Chaim, basic instructions for living, people walk away like, wow, it's unbelievable. That's number 3. But number 4, and if you realize what I did now for you, and what I did for the Jews in the room, is a powerful tactic called the straw man. You know what a straw man is? Yeah. What's a straw man?
When you misrepresent the argument, you can use it to attack.
No, that's not what I was referring to. Maybe that's a different concept. That's interesting. But what's a straw man in general, in real life? What's a straw man? Does anybody know what a straw man is?
Yeah,
To scare the scarecrows, right? It looks real, but it's not really real. Now, the Rebbe used to tell us, whenever you're talking to someone who doesn't know, who feels like you might be attacking them or trying to educate them, it's very threatening, right? So what do? Talk to the straw man. Now, who was my straw man for the Jews in that room? The Christians and the Muslims. Who's my straw man to you guys? The story. The whole story is a straw man. Because I'm not teaching you. Who am I to teach you the definition of? But if I'm telling you a story about the Christians, so Rebbe used to tell us all the time, people used to come to him on campus, and he would approach people like, you want to see there's a God? I'll show you there's a God. You know what happened after a few months? Everyone would walk away. No one wanted to be told. So instead he changes home health. There's a thing called the straw man. So a guy says to him, Rabbi, I'm an atheist. So he says, really? That's fascinating. He says, I want to tell you a story of an atheist. And he starts talking to the straw man. I once met this guy who's an atheist. And I asked him, really, you're an atheist? Can you define what an atheist is? And the guy says, yeah, I'm not really sure. You know, an atheist is really a guy who knows there's no God. So do you really know there's no God? So the guy says, no, I don't really know there's no God. So I said, an atheist, really an agnostic. What's an agnostic? A guy who is sure there's no way to prove it. Are you sure there's no way to prove it? And he's talking to the guy, but he's not really talking to the guy. Understand? So that's called a straw man. So it's a powerful tactic in education, but it's also whenever you're in conversation, it works with anyone, with your kids, with your wife, with your friends. Instead of going straight up to someone, create the straw man as an educational tactic for giving over a message. Powerful chachma. So we moved to Friendship, my wife and I, and we're still very close to Mnech. I'm still walking every day to his car, and we wanted to live in Friendship because it was a secular neighborhood, and we thought maybe we could make a difference, whatever. So we used to have guests all the time. Now, Baruch Hashem, big family, it's hard to balance everything. We used to have guests all the time. And one time we had a Holocaust, 2 people that lived in our building. For the first time. We never had them before, and they came together. One was about a 75-year-old Holocaust survivor, very, 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 very secular. Never met frum people before. Period. Could you imagine? She grew up in Europe, came to Israel, never really spent time with frum people in a real way. And our other neighbors who were Meretz, real Meretz couple living together, anti-religious as you get, okay? And we invited them for Friday night. So I make Kiddush, and then I invite whoever wants to come wash, no pressure, whatever. So neither of them come. And they're sitting there at the table, and I go wash. Now I'm hearing as they're whispering to each other. Now she's a little older, so you hear a little louder, right? So she whispers to them, are you also terrified to be here? Again, these are my neighbors, and we're very friendly, young couple with like a couple of really cute kids. Look, what's the matter? What are we going to do? They were terrified to be in our house. Terrified. Okay? So finally, they're like, the couple's like, we're terrified. And that was the conversation. Okay? Came back. Didn't hear anything, of course. And then, you're in a situation where we're having a nice conversation, and the guy from Merit says to me, a fascinating line. He says, Shimmy, you're the first Haredi-looking guy that I've ever met that didn't look at me as a project. Now, the first thing I said to him is, how do you know I don't look at you as a project? But it was, just a joke. But he meant it. Now, this is another very big tool that I learned. If you want to reach out to Jews, you got to care about them. Nikuda. The concept of I'm going to educate you, I'm going to teach you, I'm going to be that for you, it's never going to work. None of us like it when people treat us like a project. It's just not the way it's supposed to be. Well, I call that industrial Kiruv. Like I want to go into Kiruv. Why do I want to? It's a good job. It's like schmuck. And I could get that feeling of changing people's lives. But guess what? It's not going to really be effective. The way to really change people's lives is actually to care about them and not focus on their results, but focus on sharing what you have. Real Avos Yisrael. So that was lesson number 6. So when Reb Noach was nifter, this building had just opened up, and we saw tremendous potential to reach out to Israelis. 1 million Israelis come here every year. 85% of secular Israelis come in groups. So we started marketing to tour companies and why don't you bring them here? We'll create a program for them. Over 100,000 Israelis to date have been to our programs. ETL and myself. Unbelievable stuff. Really exciting. We never give lectures. It's always through an experience. Just another point. Because who's going to come to the Kotel for a lecture, right? They're going to come for an experience. And through that, you package your lecture. Anyway, one of the fascinating projects, one of the philosophies that Reb Noach taught us, and this is a big insight also for you guys, is if you know Aleph, teach Aleph. In other words, you don't need to know everything in order to be a teacher. He used to have students, when they first started Aish, after 6 months of becoming from, teaching classes. Why? Because you know how to teach. You got the wisdom here, you got the self-evident concept. Give it over. So what are you thinking now? What if they ask me a question I don't know? What's the answer? I don't know. There's nothing wrong with that. Some of the most powerful Kiruv happen when you say I don't know, by the way. Because that opens up the conversation for real discovery as opposed to I know it all. So we did research to try to understand how to follow up with Birthright. This was a partnership with Aish in New York. And Aish in New York did a survey and asked Birthright kids, we were talking about 700,000 Birthright kids have come to Israel on a $2 billion program investment. But the follow-up has been almost non-existent. So we tried to understand how could we maintain contact with the Birthright students after their visit to Israel. They have a powerful 10 days. A lot of them really have life-changing experiences. How do you make it into something that lasts? So we did a survey. Statistically speaking, most American students were not interested in coming back to Israel as a second visit. That wasn't what did it for them. So what was interesting for them? Every Birthright bus has 8 Israeli soldiers that join the trip. It's part of their personal experience. They get not just to know the land, but to know the people. This is a Birthright design thing, nothing to do with us. That means 8,000 Birthright soldiers join Birthright every year. Okay? So they said, we fell in love with our soldiers. If you can maintain a connection with the soldiers that were on our buses, then we'll do anything. So we created this thing called the 100-point challenge, which is if you do 100 activities, Jewish activities, you get points for each one. At the end of the 100 days, you earn a reunion where we fly the soldiers to America and give them a weekend where we reconnect the Birthright students to other Jewish opportunities in their local cities. That's the concept. So they turned to us and they said, we're flying the soldiers out. You guys run Asia, so why don't you do something with them? So we created a reverse Birthright for the soldiers in America. So we have a week-long, unbelievable visit to New York or LA or whatever, where we bring these kids to meet all the from business people. We bring them to families, we bring them to Hasidim and to YU, and we bring them to all sorts. And they experience Yiddishkeit for the first time. We're talking about very secular Israelis. They experience Yiddishkeit for the first time from the eyes of the American from person that wants to host them. Unbelievable. The highlight 2 trips ago was when we brought them to dinner in Mike's Bistro. Some of you guys might know that. Hosted by Satmar Hasidim. It was unbelievable. On both sides, it was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. Mind-blowing.
And then they come back to Israel and we give them the opportunity. Now you become leaders. Aleph teach Aleph. Create programs for your friends. And we'll teach more. But you create the programs and we'll be involved. Another fascinating concept is what we realize with Israelis is, Israeli chutzpah, you ever hear that term, Israeli chutzpah? Like, don't tell me what to do. I'll tell you what to do, kind of thing. So how do you deal with that? So what we did is we partnered with another program that brings Americans, American women. I don't know if you know JDBRP, it's a Jewish women's program. We brought Israelis on those programs, and they experience Israel for the first time of the American tourist that comes, American woman, mother, and they have this life-changing experience. Wow, they come to the kotel, they start crying. What are you crying about? They learn all sorts of stuff, experiences that secular Israelis never experienced. But then, here's the kicker, we created what's called grassroots communities. In other words, we're not going to build the communities, you're going to build the communities, and we're going to give you the kingdom to do it. So it's a whole program around the country now called Imahot Imahut, Mothers with Meaning. And they're creating communities around the country that are designed to be mashpia on their local cities. So we have, the goal is by the end of next year to have 20 of those communities around the country working together to bring Torah learning opportunities to their cities. But what's the point here? And this is the lesson, okay? I'm just giving you the story, but here's the lesson. The lesson is if you could give someone the bailus over their life, make them own it, it's far more powerful than you doing it for them. In other words, you want to create a program, don't be the one to create the program. Have someone else create the program and you help them. Rebbe's genius was if you came up with an idea, you know what he said to you? Great, go for it. I'll be there to help you. And there were programs that I created 16, 17 years old in Asia Torah for guys 5, 7, 8 years old because I had the idea and he said, go do it. Empower people to own their Yiddishkeit, their experience. I spoke at the Kever a couple days ago, and Reb used to tell us when he passes away, we'll be able to accomplish much more. And we're talking about a man who's larger than life. I mean, I'll give you an example. I used to walk him, and every day he used to put down his suitcase and go like this. And I thought he had a bad back for many years. I'm talking 5, 6 I thought he had a bad back. So finally I said to him, Rebbe, how do you feel Hashem's presence? How do you feel Hashem's really with you? So he puts down his bag. He puts up his bag. He says, you have to just breathe in, feel, Eloy Mavada, Hashem loves you. Just do that every day, a few times a day. I said to him, Rebbe, do you have a bad back? He said, no. And I hopped every single day, a few times a day, put down his bag. And I hopped all of a sudden. And he was trying to feel the Hashem feel, loving it. So we're talking about a man who was larger than life, but he felt that when he's gone, we could accomplish more. And I spoke at the Kevin, and I said, because when someone else is doing the job, you know the bystander effect? You ever hear that term? The bystander effect was a story that came out, a theory that came out in Queens. A woman was getting killed. And she was screaming, and there was 20 apartments around her. And everyone heard her screaming. But no one called the police. So finally, after she died, everyone asked her, people were getting, the police came around from the apartment, did you hear that? And everyone said, yeah, we heard. So I said, so what's wrong with it? I don't understand. Why didn't you call the police? Why didn't you stop it? So what was their answer? Someone else is taking care of it. So the bystander effect became a theory. And whenever you think that someone else is going to take care of it, it takes down your guard. To me, that was the message. Guys, you have to realize, no one else is taking care of it. Nobody else. In other words, the fact that you're here, you made this step to be here. The fact that you have it, that means you have something that's pushing you to be here. No one's forcing you to be here. No one's paying you to be here. You're probably even paying to be here. I don't even know how it works. No? Yeah, you're paid. It means you have something in you that's a calling. No one else is going to do the job. If you notice something, that's your calling. You notice it, it's your calling. That's it. That's how it works. It's called Nevuah. It's called Ruach HaKodesh. It's called God talking to us. It's called Hashgacha Pratis. The Rebbe Hashem's telling us, let's go. No one else will do it. I personally have a partner, Itio Goldberg. He's the guy that really is the guy that speaks. I'm more the manager. So, excuse me. But he's the real talker. And I realized that if you leverage other people's koiches to build a team, it's where power lies. We have programs around the country all the time. I think we have 5 different programs happening over the course of 3 days now. I'm not going to any of them. Because we have people taking care of it. You have to build a team. You have to build a partnership. My last conversation with the Shiva was in the hospital. And I said to Rebbe, isn't Mashiach going to come? Of course Mashiach. I said, Klal Yisrael is going to do tshuva. He said, of course, Klal Yisrael is going to do tshuva. I said, so why do I have to do it? Let Mashiach take care of the problems and that's it. He said, you're absolutely right. Mashiach will take care of it. You don't have anything to do. He says, we know what's going to happen. Mashiach's going to come. And Moshe Rabbeinu is going to come. Gedolei Yisrael. They're abundant. They're big. Everyone's going to spread out. He says, Shimmy, where are we going to be? He said, we won't even make the bleachers. He says, the Rebbeinu Shem is giving you the greatest opportunity since Ma'aseh Bereshis. If you take a chayas for his children, you're going to be right there in the front with them. The choice is yours. That's how he left me. So, I pass on that message. The choice is ours. It's a choice. It's an opportunity. And it's a great opportunity because you know what? The more we see it now, the more, people are investing millions and millions of dollars in Kiruv. There's millions of Jews not being spoken to. Not being spoken to. Not being reached. No contact. There's a huge amount of Jews in our community that need to be reached. There's a huge amount of Jews outside of the community that need to be reached. And it's only going to be up to us. And the choice is really up. So, quickly, to go over, my chavrusa, Gav Friedman, would have done like a wrap-up right now. I'm not going to do a wrap-up his style. You know Gav? I'm not going to do a wrap-up. But I will just quickly go over the points. Number 1, the first conversation. Recognize the Rebbe loves you. And if he's rooting for you, you can do anything. Number 2, get a Rebbe. The definition of Rebbe is don't ignore him. Number 3, the definition of love. Taras Chaim. And the straw man. Those are all 3 together, right? Those are 3 lessons. Number 1 is the definition of love. Focus on the good. You could do it. Number 2 is the power of Taras Chaim, the relevance of Torah. What we call self-evidence. When you say something, the other guy should be saying, that makes sense. There's tons of that. The Torah is full of that. You just have to know how to package it. Number 5 is the straw man. Learn to focus education. When you talk to someone else, try to focus on the story, not on the person. Number 6, don't look at Jews as a project. Number 7, if you know Aleph, teach Aleph. The concept of the reverse birthright. They could become our partners to create the change, even though they're totally secular. It's unbelievable. Number 8, empower people to own their Yiddishkeit. The concept of grassroots community. Number 9, work together, build a team, create a partnership. And number 10, the opportunity is ours. It's up to you. No one else is going to do the job. Take it or leave it. Any questions? What's your name?
Andrew. Don't you feel like if you can define love, it kind of diminishes love in a sense, the fact that it's more undefinitional in a sense?
I understand what you're saying. The mystique, the romance of it. But the fact is that V'ahavta l'recha kamocha is every type of love. There's a love between parents and children. There's a love between spouses. There's a love between you and Hashem. By the way, the definition of love, you know where we learned that definition from? Surprised no one asked that. What's the definition? Where do we learn the definition of love? Is a genius of Rav Noach, really. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Avos Hashem. I don't know if it's Hilchos Avos Hashem or Hilchos Tshuva. I don't remember. The Rambam writes, Kefidat she'er diyehu. Hilchos Tshuva, the end of Hilchos Tshuva. How are you going to love Hashem? According to the extent that you know Him.
Now the Rebbeinu Shalom is kulo tov. He's all good. So to the extent that you know God is the extent that you love God. In other words, the definition of love is the feeling that you get when you focus on the good. The more you know the good, the more you're going to love it. So you see in Avas Hashem, the secret to Avas, loving God, that by the way, in that same parak, and this answers your question, in that same chapter of loving God, where he talks about the definition of love, is where the Rambam describes what it means to be sick with love. Like a passionate relationship between a man and a woman. That's the Rambam defines it. So, I think there's the basic and then there's the added feelings that you might have afterwards. But you have to have the basic. The definition of love means when you focus on the good. Did I help you? A little bit? Okay?
Just to clarify, the kind of definition of love, the emotional feeling someone gets when they see the good in someone else, right? But at the end of the day, if you're defining that, what's the mitzvah of love is to love someone else, and by loving this definition is to see the good in them. What if the person doesn't feel that, a person can maybe force himself to see the good in someone else, but not necessarily feel the emotion of pleasure of being the good of someone else.
I think, look, I don't think the Torah is mechayev you to feel something. I think the Torah is telling you, do the steps that it takes, and they should have results. But according to the way I'm saying it, it's not telling you must feel the feeling. It's telling you must do the actions that it takes to feel the feeling. Okay? So let me go into that, because kamoicha is actually where this comes from. When you look in the mirror in the morning, if you're a healthy, relatively healthy person, when you see yourself in the mirror, what do you see? You see a good guy that made some mistakes. You with me? When you look in the mirror, what do you see? You see a decent guy that made some mistakes. You don't see a guy with faults. You see a guy, you have faults, but you are who you are. You're a good guy. Right? That's a healthy. So the Torah, according to this definition, kamoicha is not in kamus. It's not in echos. It's not in kamus. It's in echos. In other words, it's a process. How do you learn to focus how to love? Just like the way you do it to yourself. How do you look at yourself? You focus on your virtues. That's how you have to do it to everyone else. Does that help you?
Yeah, I think that's what I understood about. I'm saying that putting it onto someone else, and saying you're trying to teach someone else, if they don't love yourself, you're trying to.
Anytime. I say that. I say that in class all the time. The first step of loving. If you don't love yourself, please don't love me.
So I'm saying how would you?
Anytime. It's a prerequisite for practice. So, and I think that's very true. What's your name?
Eric Abraham. You said that we shouldn't treat people like they're our project, but like when you're like in actuality in practice, when you go up to someone, even like if that's not your intention, like pops to try to, or like it even sounds like you are treating them as if they're your project. How do you like stray away from that and not make it sound like you're only doing this because you want to help them, opposed to like, oh, I just know that this is beneficial information for them?
You tell me.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think you do. When you talk to someone in a way that's caring, really caring, and not, you know that guy that walks around like, I don't want to say this. Forget it, I'm not going to say what I'm going to say. Sorry. Are you looking at it as your mitzvah? Or are you looking at it because you care about people?
Am I?
Yeah, when you come over to someone, I think that's the difference. I'm going to get a mitzvah right now to share this. Is my heaven on the line right now? Or I care about people and I want to help them.
So like, let's say like there's like not even a cute situation. You just want to make someone feel comfortable, right? There's someone sitting at like a lunch table alone, and you go up and sit next to them. How does it not like come off as like, oh, I'm like, you're my project, as in like I see you're lonely and I want to like make you not in that sense. Like,
again, I think it's deeply rooted in what your intention is. If your intention is because you want the schar versus you care about people, that will come off.
eventually, I guess.
Awesome.
It's not foolproof,
Yeah.
but conceptually the point is, you really just want to extend that sense of caring to someone else as opposed to I want to care about myself. In caring about myself, I'm going to take care of you.
Maybe.
Good? Yeah.
How can you say that if you know Alex, teach Alex, and not making the other one your project?
What do you mean?
If you know something and you have to teach it, and you have to show the other one that he's not your project. At the time that you are teaching it at him, Alex, he will feel that he is your project.
Good. But that's a question for any educator, right?
Yeah.
Nothing to do with Alan first. That idea has nothing to do with anything. Anytime you're teaching someone, that could be the feeling.
How can you show that?
So I'm saying, if you're doing it for your own macho-ness, then it's not going to work. But if you're doing it because you care about people, then it will come across.
When you said about you're able to you don't know, like that opens up conversations, right? So,
I'll tell you a story. This is a story. I don't want to say it exactly as is because I'm not sure of all the details, but I believe this is more or less the true story. David Gottlieb. Who here knows him? Okay. He's a famous famous educator, philosopher. I think he's from Harvard. I think he went to Harvard or Yale, one of the two. And somehow he got in a conversation with the Bostoner Rebbe. And he was a very secular, very philosophical, whatever, and he had a bunch of questions against Yiddishkeit. He was a philosophy major, really brilliant guy. And the Bostoner Rebbe said to him, and here's his list of questions, and he gave it to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe looked at the questions and says, wow, these are unbelievable questions. I really don't know the answer to your questions. Are you willing to study it with me? And we'll go through it together. And he ended up becoming Rabbi David Gottlieb. Rabbi Gottlieb said that if the Rebbe would have given me one answer, I would never have talked to him again. Again, it's not exact quotes, you could check it with him, but more or less. He said, I was not really interested in the answers. I wanted to see if the guy cares about me as a person. You never know. Transformational saying, I don't know. You said, I'll go check it out. You want to learn it together? It's a very real answer when you say, I don't know. I say, I don't know all the time. I really don't know. All the time.
you can also do on more that is not so much in the question as the answer, so they're not touching that relationship looking for the answer, no?
I think people are desperate for a relationship. That's good. Much more than an answer. I say even more than that. It says in the Mishnah Perkei, it says Da Mala Hashiv, right? You have to know what to answer to not be cursed. That's the Mishnah Perkei. Our motto in Aish is we say it's not. People don't really care anymore. Da Mala Hashiv. People don't really care about information anymore. What do they want? It's Da Eich Hashiv. Know how to respond. In other words, how you respond is almost more important than what you say, because it's the caring and the compassion and the relationship that you build through that that's much more powerful than the information that you know. You could just Google it.
You said if you see something, say something. But what if, say, like you don't see anything, and like you don't see like your intervention taking place? Like, can you make first move? Is what I'm saying.
Based on what did I say? Are you asking that?
I'm saying if you see, you said if you see something, say something.
Oh, an opportunity.
Yeah. So if you don't see an opportunity, can you make the first move? Say like it's not really an opportunity. You just see a Jew, a secular Jew. Like, do you consider that an opportunity?
Absolutely. Whenever I'm on a plane, for example, and and I really want to sleep, but sometimes I'll have this past trip. I don't know. I was sitting next to a very prominent nurse in a secular Israeli woman. We spoke for 6 hours, and I didn't speak to her again since I have her phone number. If she gave me the wrong number, I'm missing a digit. Anyway, I'm gonna find her. It was unbelievable because she thought that we were the monsters, and we really thought we don't care about them. She really thought we hate them. And unfortunately, there's a very small minority of people that might give off that feeling, but the vast majority of us care about people.
So yes, every opportunity is an opportunity. Every person is an opportunity. You never know. I'll just tell you one more thing. I was going fundraising for the first time. I have to raise a lot of money every year. I don't know. This year is close to $1 million. And before I started fundraising, I spoke to my grandfather, who's not from, businessman, successful, whatever. And I called him, Tom, I'm going fundraising. A little bit of a hint also, right? But in that hint, I wanted to get his advice. So he says to me, what's your pitch? So I told him about this program and that program. He says, make a mistake. And my grandfather starts crying on the phone. And secular man, never heard him cry before. I was like, where is this going? He says, your father was 13 years old, and we forced him to make a bar mitzvah. Now, as a rebellion, he didn't invite any of his Jewish friends. He just invited his non-Jewish friends. So he's 20 years old. He's dating this non-Jewish girl, backpacking throughout Europe. And somebody ends up in Israel and goes into a class by Rabbi Weiner. And he was in pre-med school, and he was doing very well in school. And he heard this class. I think it was actually a class about love, fascinatingly. And he was awestruck by the man and the message and the relevance and whatever. And he was like, whoa, I have to stick around a little more. So he decides he's going to stick around for a few weeks here. And my grandparents are very nervous that he got adopted by some cult. And indeed, that's what happened. He ended up staying and dropping out of medical school. My grandfather was telling me on the phone, he said, we wanted to kill him. We wanted to kill him. He was going to be the best doctor. No way this is happening. Rabbi, no! They're like, no way. This is the worst nightmare ever. He ends up becoming a rabbi. He has 7 beautiful children. My grandfather's talking. He has 7 beautiful children. He ends up creating a program that sent 20,000 American college students to learn about the Yiddishkeit, which is a forerunner for birthright. He's 55 years old, and he has 25 unbelievable grandchildren. My grandfather's crying on the phone. He says, if your father would have become that doctor, he would have been divorced, overworked, assimilated. No grandchildren. Doctor. He says, that's your pitch. You know what I'm saying? You never know what will happen to that one guy you'll meet. And I'm standing here today as a result of that one guy who invited him to come to a class. Never know. Okay, we're done?